Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Samantha Johnson, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement at the University of Colorado Boulder's Leeds School of Business. Leeds is a top business school offering undergraduate, MBA, MS, and PhD programs and has an alumni network of over 41,000 strong living and working around the world. We're excited to have Wendy Bohling presenting on being the trail boss of your career for today's webinar. A few housekeeping items before we begin. First, if you have any questions now or during the presentation that you would like to ask, please send those questions through your chat interface. I will monitor questions as they are submitted, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. As a reminder, for optimum audio quality, we do have everyone on mute except for myself and our speaker. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please notify us through the chat interface and one of our support specialists will touch base. Lastly, a link to access the webinar recording will be sent to all registrants later today with a survey link. Now, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Wendy Bohling. Wendy is a speaker, thought leader, business consultant, and expert on leveraging the financial rewards of gender equality and inclusive leadership. She is a CEO of Corporate Cowgirl Up and author of the best-selling book Cowgirl Up, A Woman's Guide to Navigating the Corporate Frontier, and she has more than 30 years experience as an executive in the corporate saddle at some of the top telecom Fortune 100 companies and healthcare IT startups. Her transition from computer engineer to social scientist set her up for the work of building gender-intelligent leaders and driving increased profitability and innovation in business. Welcome, Wendy, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So, Samantha, we're going to jump right into this. I'm so excited to be here. And I wanted to first start out with talking about three different talented professionals. There was the first one, Sam. Sam's in a role with no upward career path, no next step, but he's highly ambitious. He just can't break into that elusive boys club. Now his role has changed. He's not in a way that will actually enhance his potential for advancement. It's actually time for him to pee or get off the pot. And he's looking externally and internally at the options to do that because he's feeling at this moment where he just can't get to that next level. Then there's Sally. Now, Sally is an EA for a president of a big company. She can do the job in her sleep. There's no next level at her current position, and she's frustrated with how to be seen differently. There's no career path or training. There's not anybody that even talks to her about a career move away from that chief of staff type of role. And Sally really wants to be a manager. She wants to run a project, but she's relegated to setting up travel, organizing board meetings, and external leadership events. And finally, there's Lauren. Now, not only did she learn she didn't have control over her own destiny in the Army, she's now getting the crap assignments. Out of the Army and into the business world, she's feeling that same stuck feeling. So, any of you out there walking that same path as any one of these three? So, Samantha, we were going to actually take the poll at this point, right? And find out how people are feeling about their own career trail rides. And I am not hearing anything.
Hi, Wendy. Can you hear me okay?
I can now. Thank you.
Awesome. Sorry, there was something going on with my headset, but I am back. So yes, we're going to go ahead and launch this poll. So as Wendy asked, how is everyone feeling about their career trail rides? So we've got a few options here. One, I've hit it big. I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling underemployed. I'm stuck. Help. And lastly, I'm currently looking for a new role. Anyone hiring? So we'll leave this open here for a few more seconds. It looks like we've got most everyone's response.
Can't wait.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. So it looks like we've got everyone in here. So let's see those results. So, Wendy, it looks like our top response here is 38% of folks say they're currently looking for a new role. And is
Wow.
anyone hiring?
Well,
And
too bad we don't have some recruiters on here.
right? Or maybe we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And 25% are feeling okay, 19% are feeling underemployed, and the other 19% are stuck and looking for help. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Well, that's not too uncommon, right? What we want to do in this time that we've got is to actually look at how to get to that bigger place, that next place where we feel like we're passionate about what we do, we're successful because of who we are and not in spite of who we are. That's really who I wrote this talk for, since I've felt that way in my own career at times. And the way we're going to approach that is really when you're prepping for a cattle drive, it really helps to be prepared. Toilet paper is a must, just like in camping and hiking. But in the meandering journeys of our professional life, it's just as important to not be left high and dry. So there's 5 important items that are imperative to our corporate trail ride to achieve that potential and to feel in control of our careers instead of at the mercy of it. So first, we need to know our brand. Second, we can't minimize the value of a posse that has our back. Third, we must be purposeful about building sponsors. And then shattering the boundaries that hold us back. That's important because we all have those ideas of where we're stuck. And finally, we need to know when to fish or cut bait or when to make that change. So let's get started. So could you write down the number 97 at your desk and take a minute to think about that one thing that you do better than 97% of the rest of the world. Now, so what is your 97%, right? And for those engineers out there on the call think there's nothing that you can do 97% better, just think about the thing that you do better than the average bear, the people around you. All right, we've got it. So what we wanted to do now was actually another poll. So Samantha, you want to take it away?
I do. Yes. So, as you said, we have one more poll here for us. So the poll is, how do you feel about the brand you portray? Options are your brand is clearly understood and the right people are sharing it. The second option is I know my brand, but nobody else does. Third, I've got some work to do to understand my own brand. And then the fourth option is I'm a train wreck and I have a lot of work to do. So it looks like we've got most of our responses. We'll leave it open for a few more moments.
They're quick out there, aren't they?
They're on it. All right, thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and close this and share the results. So, Wendy, the top response, 67% say that I've got some work to do to understand my own brand. 17% say I know my brand, but nobody else does. 11%, the brand is clearly understood and the right people are sharing it. And 6% say that they have a lot of work to do on their brand. So I'll hand it back to you.
And let's be honest, the reason you're on, that is all but the 11% are really on this call is to get help with that, right? So your brand is really dependent in knowing how you stand out. What do you do that's that better, that differentiation? So brand management is really about creating and marketing your personal brand. And just like any company's product or service, each of us has our own brand. Your personal brand is made up who you are, what you do, and how you do it. So like a successful company are very intentional about managing that brand. Successful people actually are intentional about ensuring their differentiation is very clear and very visible. So I was called Killer by one of my first department heads when I was a software tester in the digital cross connect organization that I was a part of at Lucent earlier in my career. And I had a way of kind of working people up in a frenzy to get something hard done. I wouldn't let anything stop me. I was kind of tenacious. And after refusing to allow a developer to no change a problem report I'd written, that I'd actually found in the developer's code, she went to her manager complaining that I was hard to deal with, that I wasn't a team player. And her manager told her something I'll never forget. Wendy has a passion for excellence. And that manager really got my brand. And he wasn't even my manager, which really made such an impact on me. He later sponsored me for a bigger role, even though he wasn't my immediate boss. My daughter actually got this about me when she sent me a text during college orientation we went to a year or so ago. She's in her second year of college. So we're sitting at orientation. I'm in the parent section. She's in the engineering with an engineering advisor who just didn't get what to do with all the college credit she'd gotten in high school and she was bringing into her freshman year. So after texting me her frustration, I nudged her through a couple texts to figure out the first couple steps. What is the one thing that we need to do next? So we could kind of figure out how we could divide and conquer that. And so she could tell I was worried that I was acting like the helicopter parent because I never want to do that. I want her to solve her own problems. And so she sent this text to me to show me how grateful she was. And it was one of those things that really had an impact on me. And she really got my brand, right? So our brand is really all about two things. What is your differentiation and who's promoting it? So some of you said you knew your brand, but you didn't have anybody that was out there speaking about it. So it's kind of like the light under the bushel. Does it really exist if nobody's seeing it, right? And your brand is not always 100% positive. In some cases, like with this Steve, I had a really smart engineer in one of my development groups, organizations, and I wasn't proud of it, but every time he would drop by my office, I would cringe a bit. And he would usually just throw up a summary of how things are going in the project, but in this inconsistent and rambling collections of thoughts. And I realized early on there was usually one valuable tidbit in his verbal spew. The biggest problem was I could easily miss that one tidbit if I wasn't paying attention. So I called talking to him looking for pearls in the poop. Succinct, concise speak wasn't really part of Steve's brand, but insightful feedback on the project was. So how many of you are really able to articulate your brand? And we found that out. And as part of it, I'd love to take a minute and get somebody willing to talk through their brand with us all and with me. If you're interested, would you please raise your virtual hand?
Thanks, Wendy. Yep, as Wendy mentioned, there is a virtual hand on your chat interface for your GoToWebinar panel. So if someone is interested in volunteering, we'll go ahead and unmute you. Give you a moment to raise your hand.
No risk, no reward. as my coach used to say early in my non-NBA basketball career.
All right, it looks like we maybe have a shy group. Do you have anything that might entice someone to raise their hand?
Ooh, well, what I'd love to do is actually work it through with you, Samantha, if you'd be willing.
Okay, let's do it. Sure. Everyone will learn a lot more about me. Let's do it.
So how would you talk about in one or two sentences your brand? What you do really great?
Sure. So I would say that at my core, I am wired to develop people, and that I do that through program development, collaborative partnerships, and meaningful relationships.
And that's fabulous that you're able to articulate those three. But
It took a year.
I want us to talk about it in a way that's memorable because it's almost like you're using the good words, right? The
Mhm.
right words, but you want it to stick. Like when I say I'm tenacious, given that example of being called killer, right? It sticks with you, right? So in this case, you are wired to develop people.
Mhm.
That's what you do. How does that impact everybody that's around and the organizations you work in? And I might say something like, if I were describing you, the little I know you, is you show up always making other people better just with operational interactions with them. Just doing your job, you're always looking at a way to help the other people to be more impactful.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So that is what it's doing for the organization. Not that you're really, the way you were saying it to begin with was very clear and articulate, but it wasn't the impact you were having on those around you. Do you see what I'm
Mhm.
saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a little teeny bit of how we would twist it. And I would use some sticky words, right? Like um, folks gravitate to me because they know they're going to get as much out of our interactions as I do.
Mm.
See how that sounds different,
Mhm.
impactful, and who doesn't want somebody like that in their organization that's getting the work done, but is actually attracting people and one of those folks people want to work with.
Mhm.
Okay?
I got it. I'm writing notes. That's why I'm quiet.
I love it. All right.
Does anyone else want to give it a shot? Last chance.
We got lots of content, so let's pop on because I think I'm hoping people will still get much more out of the other material we're going to, right?
Great.
So now that we've been a little clearer with it, and Samantha's been so nice about letting us use her as the guinea pig, at the power of knowing our differentiation, the second item on our trail ride is really building your posse. So it can be really lonely out there for either a cowgirl or a cowboy. For me, in a male-dominated industry from all of my career, I was usually the only woman in the room. In fact, once I noticed how long it had been that I actually started keeping track of it. And I went 8 full weeks without a woman on a conference call or a face-to-face meeting. Now, over time, the toll of isolation gets heavier when you're the only anything in the room. That could be the only salesperson or the only product manager, the only LGTB, African American, customer support engineer, right? So finding a community of a posse is even more important to the success of even the strongest and most competent person in their own career growth. We need others who have our back and are upfront and transparent with us. So our posse definitely needs to include cowboys and cowgirls that will always tell us the tough stuff. The things we don't always see or sometimes want to hear. So one of my peers came to me after working together for some time, and he gave me this critical advice I've relied on for the rest of my career. He said I had to get used to people not liking me. Now, as a recovering people pleaser, I realized I was actually watering down my worth in order to be liked. I learned that not caring if people liked me was all about releasing this stress of others' opinion of me. The higher you rise in business and in an organization, the more attention you're going to receive, both positive and negative. Everything is put under a spotlight. So if you're trying to please everyone all the time, are you really being authentic and doing the right thing for the situation? So I realized it was really important for me to have someone like that to tell me the hard, true stuff about me. Now, women can actually be hardest on each other. I know a lot of you have heard of the queen bee syndrome. It's really thought that fighting for that one lone spot on the leadership team where you can be a token check mark that you have diversity can sometimes make us work against each other as women. Now, our strength as women includes talking through things, and expressing our feelings is a positive way to build authentic relationships. In fact, research by Harvard School of Public Health has found that those who suppress emotions are 1/3 more likely to die prematurely than those who regularly express what they're feeling. Now, I don't have a problem expressing what I'm feeling, and I'm probably not worried about dying early, but we have that obligation to support each other and to reach down, pull up other women and non-represented groups that are behind us. I am talking to the women on the call at this point because this is such a pet peeve of mine, that we get rid of this queen bee syndrome thought. I'd like to move on now and talk about the importance of cultivating sponsors. So how many people have sponsors out there? How many of you actually have a sponsor? If you would mind clicking raise hands.
So, Wendy, it looks like we've got about half the group has raised their hand.
Fabulous. So there's a big difference to having a sponsor rather than a mentor, right? They play very, very different roles in our corporate trail ride. An easy way to think of the difference is that a coach speaks at you, a mentor speaks to you, and a sponsor speaks about you. And that's a very different way to have someone supporting you. And most of us are very familiar with that mentor, but I am so excited to hear that half of the people have sponsors that will actually point you to jobs. But a lot of people say, how do I even get a sponsor, Wendy, right? So I think of sponsors as hawks that really fly over the organization, see the opportunities before the job is posted, which is most of the time when you need to get in there and get your name put up. The sponsor puts their reputation at risk to recommend you. Hey, Mary, did you consider Judd for that opening in your group? He's doing some amazing work with the spinoff. Now, this guy that's putting, or gal, who's putting Judd up for that is really putting their reputation at risk. So how do we cultivate someone for putting you up for a job, right? Most importantly, you got to be terrific. I mean, exceptional, impeccable in terms of your reputation. Now, most cowgirls end up having to work twice as hard at being good, right? So we've already got that covered as cowgirls. And I bet you some of the cowboys feel this way too. But having someone recommend you requires them using that personal capital and putting that reputation on the line. This means being exceptional makes it easier for them to do that. Now, most of us, as especially cowgirls, when we were little, were taught that it's not polite to brag about ourselves. But that doesn't serve us in this highly competitive workplace. So leap out, don't wait to be noticed, right? And do great work. John Kelly is a CEO of an innovation company that uses brain scan data to diagnose and treat PTSD in veterans and concussions in NFL players. He laid it out as transparently as any body I've ever met. He said, within 3 months of being hired or brought to his team, the men are asking when they'll be promoted. He says that he has to go to the women in the team to ask them if they are interested in an assignment. And they typically respond saying they really need to finish out a current project or they wouldn't want to leave their team high and dry. So we've got to see that really waiting to be noticed does not serve us. Next, share your successes so that others know you rocked it. Something like, I just had to share this fabulous progress we've made on the Walmart deal. Now, a lot of times it's easier to talk about and brag if we first talk about what the team did, and then we talk about what our role is and what we did, right? And so that's a little trick. Finally, that projecting confidence is so important, this piece. But the final most important thing is asking. Ask what is needed to be considered for the bigger roles. The guy or gal you report to is busy. They're worrying about their own butt and not our career usually. I've had some really great managers that have done that, but in general, I can't tell you the number of times I've brought up my interest in an area and my manager said he didn't even know I was interested. It's those occasions that really you get reinforcement that being very upfront and intentional about finding out how he feels about you is important. Now, the next area is the fifth of the 5 areas, is a little interesting. It's this glass wall that I have found. Now, I set out as a corporate escapee 3 years ago with this career under my belt, really driven to see how we might approach gender equality differently. I'm using my own brand and leveraging my skills as an extroverted engineer, my experience building product both for big companies and startups, and my passion to get more women in leadership and to start their own businesses. And it's really not about teaching women to act like men to be successful. It's not about blaming men as the gatekeepers if we feel that way. It's really gender equality is a complicated problem. And I've become a social scientist in that search of why women get stalled. So this shattering the glass wall I've found is really comes back to and was portrayed in this New York Times article that recently ran, and it shared the number of female CEOs that had hit the highest number in the 53-year history of the Fortune 500. So there are 32 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. That's 6.4%. And only 2 are women of color, and there's no African Americans. So to give you context, the first female Fortune 500 CEO was Katharine Graham Washington of the Post Company in 72. As recently as 95, there were no female CEOs on the list. So the number yo-yos up and down over time. So currently at 32, it's an upturn happily. It doesn't sound too bad until you realize that there are more male CEOs named John than all female CEOs. What's worse, there are more male CEOs named David than women CEOs too. So we do have an issue. We have something to address and try to get that diversity up. So are things any brighter for women in middle management? So the pipeline is robust with 51.5% of managers being female. but that pipeline narrows as only 16.9% are women at the senior level. So the problem is these figures have been flat over the past 20 years, which, how do we break through this stall, right? So what I'm getting at, and the tough question I rarely hear spoken aloud by both men and women, is, are we destined to be that tonto forever, the sidekick? We, as amazing, capable women and men, deserve an equal shot at being that Lone Ranger. Don't get me wrong, tonto has had his role, and when I'm tonto in an organization, I work to be the best tonto I can possibly be, as I know you do. But if we need different voices in the mix at that top to really leverage the financial benefits of that diversity. Businesses have better financial outcomes and are more innovative when there are that different set of players at the table. So in my new role, I've met with about 200 people in my search to find out why gender equality is eluding us. And what I've noticed is that we have this hemorrhaging occurring at 56% of mid-career in tech are leaving. So it made me start thinking, where are they getting stuck? So what I looked at was, in an organization, there's support roles and line roles, right? And there's women and men can be stuck like this just the same, but they're stuck at these different levels within the organization. So what I kept noticing in this pattern was they were stuck in the support roles and moving across to the line roles where they were gaining experience running and managing a product. So a large number of these women had finance roles in the line roles. So they were getting that experience. In fact, Kristen Russell, one of the really most kick-ass technical women I've interviewed in the book, shattered her own glass wall when she went from leading IT at Oracle to running Accenture's digital business. But she's now the GM of one of Aero Electronics' largest business units. But I noticed something else when I looked at why can't they make that lateral move. And I found that men mentor women and men differently. Men really, when I asked women what they got mentored in, they were mentored in 3 areas. The first was around executive presence. The second was how to negotiate better. And the third was how to do the executive speak. Whereas when I asked men what they got mentored by men around, it was profit and loss and running a budget. So I thought, how do we acquire that business acumen? If that's needed to get to the bigger roles, right? We really need to gain the P&L ownership skill set to shatter that glass wall, or to actually get the ability to even find out if we like to do that. So I ask you to consider, what trails are you taking right now? What assignments, what opportunities to be ready to take on that bigger P&L role? So how do we get there? There are 2 things. First, we need men and women to mentor more women. And then we need them to mentor them differently. We need them to be both us as women and men to ask for the P&L ownership skill set. How can you help me get that, right? So a lot of people say, well, how do I even get to that place, Wendy? And I said, really it comes down to, an easy way is to volunteer for an assignment that allows you to offload the current business owner by taking on a portion of the forecasting, the tracking of the P&L. Or find a gender intelligent product owner and ask them if you could shadow them to learn the ins and outs from someone good at this already. Now, don't take no for an answer. You got to keep asking. You got to make the ask something that indicates a benefit for them. So you're smart cookies out there. You got this. You can figure out that this is going to take work off of their plate, right? And I'm working on a P&L boot camp to assist people with gaining that skills and the confidence to throw their names in the hats for those business ownership roles. Please drop me a line if you want to find out about that boot camp. So the last area is how do we, on our corporate trail ride, know when to change horses, right? I had a very inspiring leader during my time at AT&T Bell Labs named Jerry Stead. And Jerry had a philosophy we all knew as coach, change. It's much like the good to great approach to getting the right people on the bus and in the right seat on the bus. I could easily fall into being one of those leaders that did the coach change thing where I continued to try to make someone I hired successful way beyond what was reasonable. When I finally got to the point where I was sure of the decision to make a change with someone, it usually was way overdue. So it's the same with being in a bad situation for me with my own career. The longer I stayed in a situation that wasn't serving me, the more normal it started to feel. And we typically stay too long, and the longer we stay, the harder it is to make that move. You'll see in my book, but I actually reported sexual harassment 20 years into my career and was retaliated against for 18 months until finally I was fired and walked out. And in hindsight, staying those 18 months did not serve me. At the end, I started to feel and believe there was something wrong with me. That kind of normal wasn't healthy for me. Leaving that day has been a blessing in hindsight, but I sure as hell didn't feel that way on that lonely drive home when I had all my stuff sitting in a box, sitting on the car ride beside me. So when you know your gut is telling you that you may have hit a bottleneck in your career pipeline, I suggest 4 steps. The first is know the action you need to see and communicate this to the right people in a way that says what's in it for them. This is this action over talk, right? So draw a line in the sand and set a time for how long you wait to see it. Something like, I'll give my boss 3 more months to give me that opportunity to start taking on product management assignments, for instance. Also, when the time's up, ask yourself, is there any evidence that I'm getting closer to the action I needed to see? That I'll finally get sponsored for that next level? That I'll get invited into the inner circle? That my boss will finally change because of my feedback that I'm giving it? Most of us are too optimistic and really don't want to see the scoop here. We say things like, I'm sure he's busy. He did let me know he was thinking about how to send the next assignment my way. But I found, and this specifically in my own career, when I joined an amazing healthcare IT startup in Nashville, I set the timer for 1 year to know whether I was going to fish or cut bait with this company. With my startup business experience, I was sure I would know if they were going to make it after being there 1 year. And in 8 months, I took a step back and intentionally looked for evidence that led me to know they would not make it. The board had pushed the product managers to actually change the product roadmap 3 different times, to the point that we didn't even know what business we were in. So I had my answer. So a badass runs to something, not from it. So I ended up starting looking for my next right assignment. But we typically stay too long in a bad situation. So draw that line in the sand. Know when to say when. And there's a difference between failing and knowing it's time to leave, right? Be ready for that next step to make that better leap to the better place. So we've gone through knowing our brand. We built a posse. We know how to do that now. We figured out how to be very intentional and get everybody on the call to know that they're cultivating and have a sponsor. We're figuring out our own glass walls and glass ceilings and how to shatter them. And finally, when to change and look for that new assignment, right? And because we're not going to stay in that place that doesn't serve us. So let's look at what happened to Sam, Sally, and Lauren. So Sam, the ambitious Sam who hit his own career calling and was looking externally, he hit that wall, was looking externally and internally. He's leveraging his network inside and outside the company, and he's learned to pitch his brand and skills as transferable to other business units and industries, and feels like he's in control of where he lands now. After finally breaking out of the admin box as an executive assistant, kind of chief of staff, Sally has had several business roles. The most current one was a business analyst. Co-workers responded with shock and awe after she left, commenting they didn't even know she could do more or that she wanted more. She's being groomed for a management position because she has sponsors that recognize her value. And finally, Lauren, who left the Army for the male-dominated business world, used her frustration at never getting the great assignments to push harder to be considered, and she cowgirled up to make the risky career move she needed to make. She's become the trail boss of her future. She's learned how to get sponsored and do purposeful networking, and she's moved from the outside and evolved to the inside. She's had 4 promotions in 5 years. Now that's kicking ass and taking names, which is where we want to all get to. So I want to thank you for taking the time to invest in your own future, for really getting to be in charge of your career instead of at the mercy of it. And I want to ask you all to please go intentionally at how you're going to find that right next position that allows you to be the trail boss of your own career. Thank you for having me.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Wendy, so much for all of this. This was great information. We have some time for questions. So as a reminder, if you have any questions for Wendy, please submit those through your GoToWebinar panel. Wendy, we do have a question here. It's about talking more about sponsors. So can you go a little bit more into not necessarily identifying sponsors, but how do you shift the conversation with someone or approach the conversation with someone to ask them to be your sponsor? You know, maybe it's a mentor that you're looking to shift into that sponsor role, for example.
So I have to tell you, most of the sponsors I don't find that that you're successful asking them to be your sponsor. It's like asking someone to put you up for jobs that they see coming, right? It's better to talk about what you ask for their advice on how do you get considered for the bigger roles. Because most of the time, those sponsors don't have direct access to the impact you've made. And most of them want to see you in action. So the best thing I've seen is to find a way to work with the movers and shakers in the organization in some capacity, on an initiative, on one of their pet projects. You want your sponsor to be somebody, a lot of times it's somebody that used to be was your manager or was a peer that continued to get promoted, but they know your work. And you want them to continue to see the impact you're making and the growth that you're having. So most of the sponsors I've had are people that they just were so tickled with having worked with you before, that they have this desire to see you get at a bigger place because they know it's going to help the organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. That does. Another question. So this is a little bit more student focused, but I think it's applicable to anyone who is looking to make a change or some sort of shift. So for those who, let's see, how do I want to phrase this? So for those who don't have tons of experience, like for example, from the student side, no internships or jobs or clubs or activities, but they've excelled in their coursework. How do you identify what your skills are that you do or you did better than others? And I think that's applicable to anyone at any point.
Totally. So the thing I've mentored gobs of newly graduated um, students, and the thing that I've gone back to is to look at the projects you've had and figure out the ones that you really liked, because usually those were the ones you did the best at. It's like getting good grades in the classes you like the best, right? So, for instance, when I was working with one of the more recent um, young women in tech I'm mentoring, she she had the same issue, and I kept asking her, what project did you love doing? And she said, well, we were putting this little performa together with an Excel spreadsheet to figure out how we were going to make money in the business. She said, and I loved it. I said, well, what did you love about it? And how did that show up? And what made you so engaged? And how did other people talk about the role you played in that project? And she was able to see from the answering those questions how she showed up even better than that average bear again. What was her brand? And so that helped her so much to figure out what the thing she brought to the table.
Great, thank you. Another question. So you've had some great positions and bosses in your career, but what do you do about a bad boss?
Ooh,
What is
that's
your advice?
well, the first is you actually learn more a lot of times from a bad boss than a good boss. So at least be more positive about garnering those kinds of insights, because that's going to help your career. It's the same as we get more from a failure than we do a bunch of successes. Now, the failure's harder, just like the bad boss is harder, right? But 85% of people leave a job because of a bad boss. So, in most cases, again, you don't stay too long in a bad relationship, and you don't stay too long with a bad boss. Most of the time, they will suck the life out of you, just to be blunt. So what I do and suggest to people is start to look laterally at other folks you respect. Start to ask, who are great bosses out there, right? One of the best leaders I ever was able to actually have a customer was Michael Frendo. He's one of the people that I interviewed for the book. And I got to interview 48 incredible gender intelligent leaders. And what I started doing with Michael was actually talking to him about where was he going to go next, because I kind of wanted to see if I could follow where he went, because he is one of the most incredible managers. He has empathy. And that's the thing. It's like getting blood from a turnip having a boss that doesn't have empathy. And it can create so much havoc on you when they aren't understanding of any challenges you're coming up against, any that's personal or professional. So in general, I always start looking laterally at, and I do this before I get a bad boss. I'm always scanning like that hawk myself, where what's another person I'd love to work for? because you need to get as many people in the organization knowing your worth as you can. If you have a great boss and you've had him for 20 years, you're pretty much not progressing. So I say you have to continuously be looking for that next boss.
Wonderful. Thank you. A couple more questions here. So one question, in one of your last slides, you were talking about those 4 steps, those next 4 steps. And the first one was, what do you need to see? What is that action?
Yes.
So the question is that, or I statement rather, is this is a tough one. This question is tough. So what are your recommendations and your tips on stepping back and asking yourself that question and going through that process of what do I need to see that will help?
The best way I've ever handled this is to step back, think through it yourself, and then try it on somebody you respect. A respected peer, a member of your posse, right? That posse is there because they have that additional insight. So it would go something like this. I'm stuck with a manager. Oh, this actually happened to me. I wanted to gain P&L and budget responsibility. I did the work to talk to my VP about gaining that. And he said, sure. And I said, how would that look? And he said, I'm not quite sure. I said, well, would you be willing to let me work with you on next year's budget? Yeah, I'd be definitely willing to do that. Well, it came time, and he said, I'm really stressed. I really don't have time to bring you in, but after the budget's done, we'll talk through it. Well, it came time, the budget was in, and he still didn't find the time, right? So I looked at that as he's just not making time for this. So I put a stake in the ground and I said, all right, when we get to the project budget, not the large organizational budget, but the next project we were doing, that he's responsible for putting the plan together, I'm going to ask him again and remind him, I know how busy he was. I really appreciate him being open to helping get me to understand how he approaches creating that budget. But I'd really like to make this happen. It's important to me. And if I could be included in 2 weeks when we start to straw proposal out that new budget. And I had already decided that if he didn't include me in that time, and being a nag without getting on somebody's nerves in this case is a very special skill. But I ended up deciding if he didn't do that, that was my line in the sand. I'd given him 2 chances, right? So that's how I approached it. This is a really tricky one, but I have found that I will usually wait way too long to fish and cut bait in this situation.
Yeah, I would say that you're probably not alone in that, in waiting too long. I certainly can think of some examples where I've done that throughout my career. Yeah.
And think of it as throwing good money after bad, right? All right, we've gotten to this place. Yes, I've invested, this many years in this manager, but it's not getting me where I want to be. Starting over, and it's not starting over. It's picking a better horse to bet on, right? And that's what we're doing here. We're picking the right people who can make us better and who we're going to enjoy working with. It's not only about what they can do for us, right? I think you really have to like the most of the time the person you're reporting to.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So we have about 5 minutes left. I have 2 more questions for you.
Right.
So the second to last question, what what do you recommend doing if someone feels that they're in a really bad culture where they feel there might be bias?
Oh, this is a tough one. So it depends on what the bias is. So for instance, um, if it is where you're constantly being talked over, I wish I knew the specifics because that really is dependent on this. Most of the time, what I find is a person that's talking over you, 95% of the time doesn't realize they're doing it. So in general, a good thing to do is to confront them after the fact and do it in a way that allows them to save face. Like, hey, Joe, in today's meeting, I'm sure you didn't realize this, but when I was speaking, you kind of spoke over me and I wasn't able to get out my complete thought. So I'm hoping that you would consider looking at that and allow me to finish my statement, right? So I'll give you another example. There was one of the ladies I interviewed, the really fabulous leader, was the only woman on a board. And she ends up, every time she spoke up at the board meeting, the chairman of the board looked at one of her male board member peers, Jose. And as she was speaking, the chairman looked at Jose to see his reaction to what she was saying. And she got kind of tired of it. So after the meeting, she went and she asked Jose, I don't know if you noticed this, but every time I speak, the chairman looks at you. Would you be willing to speak up for me? Because what I've found is that if men call men on a behavior, it actually usually is more effective. Where sometimes if a woman, even a woman peer, calls a man on his behavior, the man can say you're being too sensitive, you're being emotional, right? So in those cases, in that case, she, at the next board meeting, she started speaking. The chairman looked at Jose and Jose said, Mary's got this. She is all over it. And from that point on, that chairman never looked at at Jose again when Mary was speaking. It was so cool. So in general, I have had the wherewithal to actually call someone on the biased behavior in the moment, but that takes a lot of calmness and a lot of emotional fortitude that sometimes we don't always have. So you want to look like you're classy at how you stop the behavior, right? And that may mean, Joe, I really am interested in what you're having to say, but could you let me finish my thought? Does that help?
That's great. Yes, it does. Thank you.
But let me say one
And
thing, Samantha, a
yes,
bad culture, if it is systemic and it goes down, it usually is not going to change unless there's some huge disruptor. So again, it's like having that bad boss. You got to look around at better departments within your company, or sometimes look outside.
sure. Yeah, that's great. That's a really great point. Definitely. And so the last question before we end the webinar here today, you gave a lot of great content and steps and things for everyone to think through. If there's one thing that you recommend that as soon as everyone leaves the webinar today, they do first, what is that one thing?
It is being clear about your differentiation. I have been collecting some examples of your elevator pitch, as I put it, and that's the probably two to three, 3 to 4, sometimes sentences that somebody might use to introduce you to someone else or to get someone else to consider you for a role, right? That 3 things that you can use when you send a resume. Like Samantha, if I had a job that I wanted you to, I thought you would be great for, with a friend of mine, I would send you a resume, but I would include that elevator pitch because that's going to get their attention, right? And to be good at talking about that elevator pitch, right? And really leaning in to what makes you great. It happened to me. I was with for the first time in my career, I talked about my biggest skill is saying the hard stuff. When I go into an organization, I'm the one that says the things other people only think. I'm the one that says, hey, I think what's holding us back is our inability to be agile and to respond more quickly to the customer needs. And I think that's happening because of X, Y, and Z. I'd like to help us fix it. Now, when I went into an interview and I talked about that, I said, look, if you're looking for somebody that just is going to get things done the way you want them done, the way you do them, and not really speak up when they see something that needs to be changed, I don't think I'm your right person. But if you want somebody that's going to come in and make the organization better, I am so good at seeing that and helping you to get to a different place that I think I'm a perfect fit for this organization. And you see how much more powerful that sounds, Samantha, and the rest?
Yes, that's a great example. Thank you, and good thoughts to leave us all with. So I do want to say again, thank you so much, Wendy, to you for all of this wonderful information, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us for today's presentation. To view upcoming webinars and request previous recordings, do please visit our website at colorado.edu/business/webinars, and we will be sending that link to the recording later today with a survey link to include the opportunity to be considered for a complimentary 30-minute coaching session by filling out that survey for us. So have a great rest of your day and go Buffs.
Go big or go home, people.